Mitchell Joseph, the chairman and CEO of Joseph Company International and West Coast Chill, has been involved with the beverage industry his whole life, and it started right here in Youngstown.
Tell me about growing up here in the Valley.
Well, I was born on the east side, North Lane Avenue, and fourth generation of soft drinks, Dad's old-fashioned root beer and squirt. And for the first 7 years, I went to Immaculate Conception. I was baptized there, and at the age of 7, 8, we moved to Columbus because at that time my great-grandfather had logistics problems of trying to deliver soft drinks to Columbus, Cincinnati, West Virginia, and Kentucky. So he consequently opened another location in Columbus, and that's where I grew up. Coming back every summer to Youngstown.
To see grandparents? Or
see our cousins and grandparents, a big family here. And so what happened from that point on is I got a baseball scholarship after graduating from high school in Columbus to Ohio State. I spent my freshman year there, and then I was notified by my grandfather that I was moving to Youngstown to learn the bottling business, which Youngstown and Star Bottling, which it was called, was the last of the facilities.
Now explain that. You were notified by your grandfather?
Yeah, you weren't, back then, it was a little bit different than it is today. You're told one thing and yes sir, no sir, and so he said, you're going to go to Youngstown, you're going to learn the bottling facility and how to do certain things in our industry, and that'll equip me a lot better. So, I always loved Youngstown. Youngstown was a part of my DNA. So when I came up to Youngstown, it isn't what President Tressel has built today. Yeah. We did have Jones Hall and Todd Hall and Kilcawley, and that was about it. But I enjoyed it. I had family around me. I had great educators. I got a degree in liberal arts, which then I transferred from School of Commerce at Ohio State to liberal arts, which basically had a pre-law designated course that I took.
So you wanted to be a lawyer?
I wanted to be an attorney. My great-grandfather and grandfather felt that being an attorney, we could be in-house with our contracts and agreements and have better control of our futures. And so I graduated from Youngstown State. I was accepted into the Ohio State Law School. I started Ohio State Law School, and after 10 days, I was drafted, like most of us in 1969. But consequently, during my induction period, President Nixon came out with the lottery, and that was the first thing I had won out of college. So I had a high number. This process took, a little less than 2 weeks. So I was advised by the dean that, I should wait because I was far behind. And that law school was a lot different than undergraduate, where it'd be a lot more difficult to catch up.
When you were a kid, and when you were in high school playing baseball, was it your dream to be a professional baseball player?
Yeah, I was going to be a New York Yankee player, take my mother all over, the world playing baseball. And again, growing up in Ohio, I should have been Cincinnati Reds or Cleveland Indians, but being Italian heritage, we followed the New York Yankees. So yeah, I was going to be a New York Yankee player.
So when your grandfather told you it's time to come back, what was going through your mind at that time? Were you angry? Were you just in agreement?
Well, Youngstown was far behind Columbus, Ohio, in every aspect. And but Columbus did not have the ethnic side that Youngstown had. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have I had a lot of good friends in that, but again, not we used to say the word doings. You know what a doings is? A doings. Very few people know what a doings is. That's going to a party or to an event. And when I married my wife, I said, yeah, there's a doings in Youngstown. She said, a what? I said, a doings. But Youngstown, and especially the east side, it had its own dialect. It had its own way of doing things. I was telling people when I returned here that up until I was 18 years old, We never went into a store and bought pants. Everything were tailor-mades. And so it was a whole different flavor than Columbus. Columbus more preppy, penny loafers and that. And it was a little bit tough when I came to Youngstown because a lot of my cousins did not go to the university, and they dressed a little flashy, and it was kind of a culture change a little bit for me, but I loved it here.
As a kid, were you an inventor type? What did you like? I mean, is it strange for you that you moved it on the path that you did?
I was always a visionary. I would never call myself an engineer or a scientist. I have employed for over 24 years some of the greatest engineers and scientists in the world. And our intellectual property of patents, both in the United States and global, share that philosophy. I liked, back then when I went to school here at Youngstown State, there was really no such word as an entrepreneur. And if you heard that word, it had more connotations of a dreamer. And visionary, that was another word back in the 60s they never used. So today, as you coin all these different words and technology with the terminology, I think I followed along those lines of a visionary. And the other thing that Youngstown was very good for me is I never followed protocol. And I think Youngstown State gave me more of a freedom base than Ohio State, where I was, I had to figure my own time elements and, what classes I wanted to take. And if I wanted to take a night class, it was easy because it was only 5 minutes from where we lived. Where Ohio State, that was a whole different, avenue to have morning and night classes. So there was a lot more freedom here. There was a lot more things to do with regards, especially since I wasn't playing baseball, to learning about the beverage industry. And that was the whole reason I was here.
And so how did your career progress then? The family moved to California?
What happened is I graduated, and as I graduated from Youngstown State and began to go to the Ohio State University, my family sold the last bottling facility, my great uncle's, which was Youngstown Lane Avenue. And so following that, I had nowhere to go. So for the next several years, I got involved in more apparel, textiles, and things like that. But my dream was always the beverage industry. So by the late 70s, I had trained myself to get back into the beverage world. Now the problem with that is that years ago, we were into the beverage families from our great-grandfather, but things had transpired where mom and pop bottling facilities were gone. So I had to be creative. So how am I going to get back in the beverage industry when all I have is some family legacy and a story? But, I don't have rights to anything. I don't have any licenses to Coke or Pepsi or, Anheuser-Busch or Heineken. So what do I do? And that was a struggle, and that's where I first learned to be an entrepreneur.
So was the chill can your first idea?
So what happened is I got involved. I had met a young man whose family sat on the board of directors of a German brewery. And this was in 1979, 1980. And I had never been anywhere outside really Ohio. I went to Las Vegas out of college for, vacation. I went out to California a couple times. So he was telling me about they would love to come to America. One thing led to another. I took my first trip to Nuremberg, Germany. I met his family. They wanted to know what kind of expertise I had in importing and distribution of beverages. I had none. However, I had a great story. I'm fourth generation of soft drinks in America, and I knew a lot of people, and that's what led them to believe that maybe I could do something. So about 6 months later, I landed a import license from Patrizier. And Patrizier was out of Nuremberg, Germany. They were the largest brewery in Germany. And the reason is they were a series of acquisitions and mergers of other smaller German breweries that put them together with the history and a heritage of over 500 years. 1981 to 1984, I went ahead, boy, that's a long time ago, isn't it? So I went ahead and started marketing Patrizier. So I knew that most beer was drank before, during, and after athletic competition than any other time. So I went, met a few of my friends that were in the NFL. I hired a couple NFL football players, and we began in the next 3 years to get distribution, mainly through Coors, a few Miller distributors, and we built a nice market for the Germans. And at that time, I went back to Nuremberg and said, I'm spending all my money, the little bit I had, and, we needed to create a marketing program. We can expand, we did a demographics, we did a projected sales forecast. We can expand if we had X amount of money. So we agreed to do that. So in 1984, I entered the first international beer tasting contest ever in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace in the Sports Pavilion, where every beer in the world had a booth. And they allowed 10,000 people in for one day, and you had to give them a little cup of your drink, and then they voted on you. Well, the beer I had was a lager, or a Pilsner from Germany. It was the best. We won the International Blue Ribbon. And from there, I went back to Germany, and at exact same time, if you study economics, you'll find out that the German mark, like a lot of European money, had slid the opposite way. The valuation now was lower, so they couldn't do what they had promised me. So now we didn't have the marketing money and the marketing edge that we once thought we would have, so that disbanded. Now, because I won the international beverage for malt beverage, I received a phone call 2 weeks later from Las Vegas Distributing, and they said, we were a part of that international show, and we did a little history on you after winning the contest. Could you come back to Las Vegas? Well, you didn't have to twist my arm back then and go back to Las Vegas. So I went back to Las Vegas. I met with Las Vegas Distributing, and they explained to me that in the casinos, each month, the beverage buyer from each casino, they meet. And you present, you being the distributors, vodka, bourbon, scotch, tequila, rum, and whoever had the best price won the bid. So if you're selling vodka at $20.95, and I'm selling vodka for $20.90, automatically I get the bid. So as long as you're talking apples for apples, it's decent quality. So I built, in the next 2 years, a pretty good business. So I was bottling out of South San Francisco at that time, because one of the things that I did in the interim is that I accepted a call from Anaheim, which was from Disneyland. And this is right after I had won the International Beer Tasting Contest. And they asked me would I fly to Anaheim. Well, it was in January. It was 8 degrees in Ohio. I flew there, and it was 78 in Orange County. So I loved it. I said, man, I love it out here. So I spent 3 days. I was with the Disneyland people, and what they wanted was their name on a bottle of distilled spirits for their restaurants and their hotels. They wanted Disneyland vodka, Disneyland bourbon, scotch, tequila, etc. Well, in 1984 and 85, no one had ever done a private label. Today you have Giant Eagle and you have 7-Eleven. That didn't exist back in the 80s. So what did I know about whiskey? Nothing. So I learned about distilled spirits. I learned about vodka and gin and bourbon and scotch are the only two whiskeys that are aged in barrels. And so after about 6 months of going back and forth with the hierarchy of Disneyland, we came up with tastings that they kind of liked. So I ended up getting the contract for Disneyland and applying for a label approval with the United States government to where to this day, I own the name Disneyland Hotel for distilled spirits.